15-year-old twins are pregnant at the same time. And when the truth about the father of their child is revealed, the atmosphere in the room becomes tense. Izold has no choice but to back down when her father shouts, ordering her to marry Aldin tomorrow. Izold looks at him with challenging eyes, her heart pounding. Beside her, her younger sister trembles with fear. Izold's father, a man of few words but powerful, affirms his decision. Her mother stands by pleading but still supports him. "You can't marry Aldin, I love Orin," Izold screams, but her father doesn't listen. He slaps her hard across the face, sending Izold staggering back, her cheek stinging. "You will marry Aldin or you will lose everything. No home, no family," he threatens. Izold looks at her mother in despair, but she remains silent. Locked in her room, Izold collapsed onto her bed, crying in pain. She couldn't believe her parents would force her to marry someone who didn't love her. As night fell, she heard a knock on her window. It was Orin, his face worried. Izold hurried to open the door, trembling. "Orin, you shouldn't be here," she whispered. Orin climbed in and hugged her tightly, gently touching the bruise on her cheek. "What did they do to you?" he asked. Izold couldn't hold back her tears. "They forced me to marry Aldin. If I didn't listen, they would disown me." Orin held her tighter, his heart aching. "I can't bear the thought of losing you," Orin said. Izold nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Your father has made up his mind. You have no way out." Orin knew this might be the last time they would see each other. "I love you, Izold. No matter what, I will always love you," he whispered. Izold responded with a kiss filled with pain, love, and despair. It was both a goodbye and a promise that no matter what happened, their love would never fade. They kissed until they were both breathless, not wanting to part, but knowing they had to. The cruel world outside awaited. Orin leaned his forehead against Izold's, breathing heavily. "I will never forget you, Izold," he whispered. "No matter where life takes us, you will always be in my heart." Izold nodded, tears streaming down her face. The next morning, the village was filled with the sound of wedding trumpets. Izold walked through the wedding day with a broken heart, her eyes lifeless as she repeated her vows. Aldin stood smugly by her side, for Izold, the most beautiful girl in the village, now belonged to him. Marriage to him was just a way to satisfy his own desires. After the ceremony, Izold saw Orin from afar, but she felt only emptiness. Life with Aldin brought no joy, no love. He often went away on business trips, leaving Izold alone in the cold house. A year later, Izold gave birth to twin girls, giving her a glimmer of hope. However, Aldin was disappointed because he expected a son. He threw himself into work, leaving Izold to raise the children alone. Izold loved her 2 daughters, but loneliness still surrounded her. She often thought of Orin, but knew she would never see him again. She was Aldin's wife, and that was the reality she had to face. 15 years had passed, and Izold had gone from a dreamy young girl to a responsible mother, shouldering everything. Her 2 daughters, Celine and Taryn, were grown. Aldin had completely disappeared, no longer in contact. The letters about work had stopped. On a hot late summer afternoon, Izold sat knitting on the porch, finding some peace in the steady rhythm of her needles, trying to forget the emptiness that had taken over her life. Today, Izold's thoughts were no longer focused on knitting. A neighbor passed by and shared some confusing news. Aldin, her husband, who had left her to raise 2 children alone, had been discovered in the city. What was even more surprising was that he had a new family, a wife and a son. The news left Izold stunned, her hands resting on her lap, the unfinished scarf forgotten. She looked out at the dusty road, not knowing whether to feel angry or sad. All the emotions were mixed inside, but strangely there was a bit of relief mixed with bitterness. Aldin had left her 2 beautiful daughters, inheriting her looks, and now he had the son he had always wanted. The thought left Izold feeling empty. Mother Celine's voice broke her train of thought. Izold looked up at Celine, her long black hair, just like Izold's when she was young. "Taryn and I are going to the market. Do you need anything?" Celine asked, her eyes shining with concern. Izold watched her daughter and replied softly, "No, but don't be late." Celine nodded, a glint in her eyes before she disappeared into the house. Izold sighed, putting down her knitting. She had always tried to protect her children, but they were 15 now, and she knew she couldn't stop them from growing up and making their own decisions. In the room, Celine found Taryn, brushing her hair in front of the mirror. "Are you ready?" Taryn asked, smiling brightly. "I can't wait to go out." Celine smiled, but her mind was elsewhere. Together they left the house, laughter drifting through the window to Izold, making her smile, but it quickly gave way to worry. Celine and Taryn, unaware of their mother's worries, chatted lightly on the way to the market. Taryn asked Celine about her special someone, and Celine, blushing, confessed that they hadn't met today, but had made plans for tomorrow. The sisters kept it a secret, the joy of the suspense making life more interesting. What Celine and Taryn couldn't have imagined was that they were both in love with the same man, Rhett, the boy with the dark hair and charming smile. He had captured both their hearts, but they didn't know that he had done the same for the other. Rhett, as a veterinarian, carefully separates his encounters with each, knowing that if discovered, everything will fall apart. When they reach the market, the two sisters separate, each pursuing their own work, but both lost in thoughts of Rhett. Celine felt her heart beat faster as she remembered the way Rhett held her hand and the way his eyes made her feel like she was the only one. Taryn, stopping by the fruit stand, felt the same way as she remembered how Rhett made her feel special. That evening, as the sun set, the two sisters returned home, their faces filled with excitement. Izold, who was waiting at home, asked in a calm but somewhat harsh voice that made them both stop. They answered quickly, and Izold felt her suspicions begin to become reality. After the children left the kitchen, Izold gently instructed, "I only want the best for you. Don't waste your life on things that don't matter." Celine and Taryn sensed the worry in their mother's words. Back in their room, they discussed in confusion and worry about whether Izold knew anything about their relationship with Rhett. "We have to be careful. We can't let Mom find out," Celine said, worried. Autumn came, bringing with it a gloomy cold and a change in the atmosphere of the village. Izold's health, already weak, began to decline severely. At first, she felt persistent fatigue, then constant chest pain. Finally, one morning she collapsed, and when the doctor came to visit, he gave a devastating diagnosis. Izold barely had the strength to break the sad news to Celine and Taryn, who were shocked and devastated when they heard what their mother said. Their world suddenly became small and fragile. "I'm sorry," Izold whispered as she held her two daughters, her voice weak and trembling. "I'm so sorry," Celine sobbed. "No, don't leave us. We need you." Taryn clung to Izold, pleading, "Mom, there must be a way. We will take care of you. Please don't leave us." Isold's heart ached at the sight of her two children's pain. She had always feared this day would come, but she had not expected it to come so soon. Izold had so much more to do, to see her daughter grow up, but fate had decided. Over the next few weeks, Celine and Taryn cared for their mother, staying by her side every day. They helped her eat, dress, and rest, trying to ease her pain. But despite their grief, the pull of youth and love for Rhett remained strong. Their secret moments with Rhett became a refuge, a place to escape from the dark reality. When they could, they would sneak up on Rhett in the hidden corners of the village. His gentle touches sent shivers down their spines, and though they knew it was a sin, they could not resist the pull. Izold, weak as she was, noticed the changes in her two children, the flushed faces, the secret smiles. She did not have the strength to face them, but she knew what was happening. Though it pained her to see her daughters grow up so quickly, she also understood that it was a part of life. As death approached, Izold reflected on her life, on Orin, whom she had loved so deeply. With her last strength, she wrote 2 letters, one to Celine and Taryn, filled with love and advice, and one to Orin, whom she had never forgotten. She asked her faithful housekeeper to give the letter to Orin after her death. That night, Izold died in her sleep, her 2 daughters by her side, not knowing that it would be the last time they would be with their mother. At dawn, the housekeeper wrapped himself in a heavy shawl and went to Orin's small house on the outskirts of the village. Time had not been kind to Orin. His once black hair was streaked with gray, his strong figure was thin, and loneliness enveloped him. He lived alone, never to remarry, for his heart still belonged to the woman he had lost many years ago. When he opened the door and saw the housekeeper, his heart skipped a beat. He asked hoarsely, "Is she gone?" The housekeeper nodded, her eyes filled with tears, handing him a letter from Izold. "She passed away peacefully last night," she said. Orin held the letter with trembling hands, his heart heavy. The overwhelming emotion made him feel as if he were lost in a void, both painful and sacred. He sat by the fire, where he had spent many nights thinking about Izold and the life they had lost. Taking a deep breath, he opened the letter and read, "Orin, if you are reading this, I have left this world. I carry you in my heart, and not a day goes by that I do not think of you and the life we could have had. There is something I must tell you, something I have kept from you for too long. Celine and Taryn are not Alden's children, they are yours. They were conceived in love, a love that never dies. I kept it from you because I wanted to protect them and give them a normal life. But now I need you, they need their father. Take care of them, love them, guide them. You have loved me all my life, and I know you will do the right thing. I love you forever. Izold." Isold's words hit Orin like a wave, washing away years of regret. The fact that he was Celine and Taryn's father made his heart ache, but at the same time, a wave of love surged through him. Izold, even after her death, had given him the most precious gift, the family he had always longed for. Although it was too late to share this with her, now he had the chance to be a father and care for his children. Orin knew that he would honor Isold's request. He decided to take care of Celine and Taryn, to be the father they needed. and to keep Izold's memory alive. With trembling hands, Orin carefully folded the letter and placed it in the envelope. After calming down, he promised himself to protect his two daughters, watching over them from afar without letting them know the truth. Celine and Taryn, though they share everything with each other, keep one secret: their feelings for Rhett. After their mother's death, the regret of breaking their final promise to Izold weighs heavily on their hearts. Izold warned them not to fall in love too soon, but they both fall for the charming, mysterious Rhett Darrow. A year after their mother's death, the house grew emptier. The sisters, though still close, grew distant because of their secret. Both experienced physical changes like nausea and fatigue, but they convinced themselves it was just the flu. However, the truth gradually became clear. A week after realizing that their flu was not going away, Celine and Taryn found excuses to leave the house, both headed to the same place, Rhett's house. Celine arrived first, worried about what would happen. When she reached the door, she knocked lightly and Rhett opened it, pulling her into his arms with a strange eagerness. "Celine, you're pregnant," she said, her voice trembling. Rhett was silent for a moment. Then the smile returned to his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Wonderful," he said softly, inviting her into the kitchen. Celine felt nervous but was carried away by Rhett's charm. He poured her a glass of wine and offered her a toast to their future. Though she knew she shouldn't drink while pregnant, Rhett's intense gaze made her feel pressured. She took a sip, the bitter taste spreading, but she forced herself to swallow it. When Rhett left to attend to something else, Selena sat back, a sense of unease rising. Something was wrong, but before she could think further, Rhett returned with a wider smile and said everything would be perfect. "Celine," Rhett said, kissing her forehead, "you'll see it'll be okay." An hour later, Celine left Rhett's house, her mind reeling with conflicting emotions. She wanted to believe that everything would be okay, but the feeling of anxiety wouldn't leave. When she got home, Taryn still hadn't returned, and the house was strangely quiet. Celine sat on the bed, trying to shake off the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. About 30 minutes later, Taryn returned, her face pensive. She sat next to Celine, both silent, lost in thought and fear. Finally, Taryn broke the silence, whispering, "Celine, I'm pregnant." Celine was stunned. "Taryn, me too." The air around her became heavy. Both sisters couldn't believe it, their fear growing. Suddenly, Celine felt a sharp pain in her stomach, and she gasped, clutching her stomach as the pain spread. Taryn screamed, experiencing the same pain. They both fell to the floor, gasping for air, in pain. Taryn's voice was weak. "I think Rhett poisoned you." Taryn's words stabbed Celine's mind. She couldn't believe it, but the truth began to sink in. Rhett, the man they loved, had betrayed them. He had poisoned them both, and was the father of the children they were carrying. The pain of Rhett's deception washed over Celine as she realized he had played them, turned them against each other, and now he intended to end their lives. The two sisters lay on the cold floor, their hands clasped in their final moments. Even in death, they were inseparable. They shared the love and the tragedy that had torn them apart. As their breathing grew fainter, the sun began to set, drawing long shadows across the village. Orin trudged along the dirt road, feeling uneasy, though he could not quite understand why. Orin walked toward his cottage, but his mind kept returning to Isold's letter, the revelation that had changed his life forever. Celine and Taryn were his daughters, and the truth burned into his chest like a seal. He had sworn to protect them, but when he heard laughter echoing from the back of the tavern, he could not ignore it. The laughter caught his attention, and as Orin drew closer, keeping himself in the shadows, he saw Rhett Darrow leaning against the wall, drinking with a group of young men. Rhett, his face flushed with alcohol, told the story in a smug tone. Orin felt uneasy hearing Rhett's familiar tone, the same one that had charmed Celine and Taryn. As Rhett began to boast about his exploits, speaking of the sisters with vulgarity and contemptuous pride, Orin could only clench his fists, his nails digging into his palms. Rhett grinned wickedly, detailing the differences between Celine and Taryn. Everyone around him laughed, while Orin felt his blood boil. But what was worse was when Rhett talked about having to deal with the children. "I did what any smart man would do," Rhett said, a cruel smile on his face. "Give them something to keep them quiet forever." The words stabbed Orin's heart like a knife. He choked as the horrifying truth dawned on him. Celine and Taryn might be in danger. When one of the men in the group noticed Orin's figure, the laughter abruptly stopped. Rhett turned, his face changing from amusement to fear as he recognized Orin. Without a word, Orin lunged at Rhett with a terrible fury, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the wall. "What did you do to them?" Orin roared, his eyes burning with anger he had held back for so long. Orin's voice was low, dangerous as he pressed Rhett harder against the wall. "What did you give them?" Rhett, panicked, tried to pull away, but to no avail. "Just some medicine to make them sleep," Rhett gasped, desperate. "What kind of medicine?" Orin demanded, tightening his grip. "Rohypnol," Rhett stammered, horrified. Just enough to knock them out, not kill them. Orin's heart pounded, realizing he didn't have much time. He dropped Rhett to the ground and dashed out into the street, straight for Dr. Merrick's house, the only one in the village who could help. Orin pounded on the door, desperate to explain the situation. Wasting no time, Dr. Merrick gathered the ingredients and prepared the antidote. "We have to hurry," he said, "or they won't survive." The two hurried back to the village square, but when they arrived, the sight stunned Orin. The villagers gathered around Celine and Taryn, the sisters lying motionless on the ground, people murmuring in shock and grief. It was too late. Orin pushed through the crowd, kneeling beside his daughters, his heart broken. But Dr. Merrick interrupted. "We must act now, Orin." With trembling hands, helped the doctor inject the antidote into each of them. Time seemed to drag on, but then a miracle happened. Celine's chest began to rise and fall, her breathing weak but clear. The crowd gasped as the sisters slowly regained their strength. Orin could not hold back tears as he realized they would live. The next morning, Orin reported Rhett's actions to the police. The police quickly arrested Rhett, who now cowered in his home, no longer complacent. Rhett was tried and convicted with the assurance that he would never harm anyone again. In the months that followed, Celine and Taryn, shocked by what they had experienced, found solace in Orin, whom they now knew was their father. His presence became a strong anchor that helped them overcome their grief and begin the healing process. Orin, though quiet, demonstrated his love through quiet but powerful actions. Orin devoted himself to caring for Celine and Taryn, ensuring they had everything they needed as they prepared for the arrival of their babies. His love, once hidden, became a source of strength for the family. As the months passed, his bond with his daughters deepened. Celine and Taryn often sat with him, sharing stories, asking questions, and finding comfort in Orin's advice. For the first time, the sisters felt safe in the arms of their father's love. With Orin's guidance, the sisters began to rebuild their lives, finding joy in their daily routines. The village, once filled with whispers and judgment, became a place of support. The villagers, witnessing their ordeal, rallied to help and treat them with kindness. Though still haunted by the past, Celine and Taryn find hope in the small actions of those around them. As the birth date approached, Orin became more attentive, taking care of every detail, from bedding to meals, always making sure they were never left alone. Although his concern sometimes seemed overprotective, Celine and Taryn understood that it came from a love that had been denied for too long. The day of birth came on a quiet morning. Celine and Taryn, resilient in the face of pain, showed the same determination they had shown in their trials. Orin was nervous but always calm, holding their hands as they brought their daughters into the world. Although the birth was difficult, with the support of the midwife and Orin's encouragement, they pulled through. When the babies cried, all the pain seemed to melt away. Celine was the first to hold her daughters, her face radiant with joy she had never felt before. Taryn felt the same way as she held her daughter, feeling the promise of a brighter future, soothing the wounds in her heart. Taryn could not have imagined the fullness of holding her newborn daughter in her arms. She felt a surge of love and protection so strong that it brought tears to her eyes. For the first time since Izold's death, Taryn felt the void inside her filled. Orin stood between his daughters, looking down at them with pride and reverence. The sight of it reminded him of the continuity of life. Despite the tragedies of the past, he knew that these children, born of suffering and perseverance, were a testament to the strength of family. The village also rejoiced at the birth of the girls, seeing them as symbols of renewal and hope. Those who had once judged now brought gifts and well wishes, ready to welcome new lives. Celine and Taryn, tired as they were, accepted the kindness with gratitude, knowing it was the result of goodwill since Rhett's exposure. As the days passed, Celine and Taryn settled into motherhood. Orin was always there, offering constant support, helping to care for the children and offering advice. The family often sat together in quiet moments, reflecting on the journey they had taken. Celine and Taryn recognized the strength they had learned from Orin, from within themselves. The birth of the girls marked not only a new beginning for Celine and Taryn, but also for Orin. He, who had lived with regret for losing Izold and not being there for his daughters when they needed him, now felt redeemed. Looking into the eyes of his grandchildren, Orin saw Izold, her strength, love, and resilience still alive. As winter came and the first snows fell, the family found a sense of peace they had lacked for years. While the road ahead was not easy, they knew they were no longer alone. Together they faced the future with hope, ready to build a new life filled with love and happiness.